The sound came first, a sharp crack that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. Not loud enough to be alarming, not soft enough to ignore. It was the kind of sound that lives in the space between your ears and your gut, the kind that says something just broke that shouldn't have broken. I was standing in the living room of the Kowalski house on Maple Ridge Drive, a sprawling two-story colonial in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, built in 1987 and showing every year of it. The June morning heat was already creeping through the windows, and I could smell fresh-cut grass from somewhere down the street. 3 other contractors stood around me: Mike, who'd been doing electrical work since before I was born; Derek, the plumber with hands like catcher's mitts; and Tom, the project manager who'd hired us all for this renovation job. And then there was her. She walked in carrying what looked like a toy. A bright pink toolbox with cartoon flowers on the side, the kind you'd buy at a big box store for someone who wanted to hang picture frames on a Sunday afternoon. She set it down on the dusty hardwood floor with a soft thud, and I swear I heard Mike snicker behind me. "Morning," she said, straightening up. Her name was Claire Hewitt, according to the crew sheet Tom had sent around. Structural consultant. I'd worked 23 years in construction and renovation. Started as a laborer at 19, worked my way up to lead carpenter, and I'd never once seen a structural consultant show up to a job site with a pink toolbox covered in daisies. She was maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, work boots that actually looked worn in, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. But none of that mattered when you walked onto a job site carrying something that looked like it belonged in a child's playroom. "That's quite a toolbox," Derek said, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that's meant to sound friendly but isn't. Claire glanced down at it, then back up at us. "It was a gift from my daughter," she said simply. No defensiveness, no explanation, just a statement. "Well, let's hope the structure of this place is sturdier than that thing looks," I heard myself say. The words came out before I could stop them, and Mike actually laughed out loud this time. Tom cleared his throat. "Claire comes highly recommended. She's going to do a full assessment before we start the main demo work." The homeowners had some concerns about the second-floor addition. I nodded, but I'd already made my judgment. I'd seen this before. People with credentials and degrees who showed up to real work wearing clean clothes and carrying inadequate tools. Book-smart people who'd never swung a sledgehammer or spent a December afternoon on a roof in freezing rain. The Kowalskis wanted to renovate the entire second floor. The addition had been built by the previous owners in the early 90s, and there were concerns about whether it had been done to code. That's where people like me came in, to tear out the old work, assess the damage and rebuild it properly. It was a 6-month project, good money, and exactly the kind of job that kept my own small crew employed through the slow winter months. Claire knelt beside her toolbox and opened it. Inside, I could see a mismatched collection of tools. A small level, a flashlight, some kind of moisture meter, a few wrenches that looked like they'd never seen a rusted bolt. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pencil. "I'll need about 2 hours to do the initial assessment," she said, standing up. "I'll start upstairs and work my way down. Try not to disturb anything structural until I'm done." "We know how to do our jobs," I said, more sharply than I intended. She looked at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were grey-blue, the color of sky before a storm. "I'm sure you do, Mr. Carter. Ben Carter. Mr. Carter." She picked up her toolbox and walked past us toward the staircase. After she disappeared upstairs, Derek leaned in close. $20 says she's done in an hour and finds nothing." "I'll take that bet," Mike said. "She's going to find concerns everywhere because that's what consultants do. More concerns means more billable hours." I didn't take the bet. I was too annoyed. The problem with the construction industry in 2023 was that everyone thought they could do this work. YouTube University, weekend warriors, and now consultants with pink toolboxes who probably couldn't tell a load-bearing wall from drywall. Tom pulled out his phone and started going over the schedule. We had to wait for Claire's assessment before we could start any demo work, which meant we were burning daylight. I walked over to the front window and looked out at Maple Ridge Drive. The neighborhood was the kind of place where people actually talked to their neighbors, where kids rode bikes in the street until the streetlights came on, where every other house had a trampoline in the backyard. The Kowalskis had 3 kids and 2 dogs, and they'd moved into temporary housing for the duration of the renovation. Above me, I could hear Claire moving around. Footsteps, silence. More footsteps. At one point, I heard what sounded like tapping, probably that useless little level she'd pulled from her toy toolbox. "She's taking forever," Derek muttered after about 90 minutes. "Consultant pace," Mike said. "We're on their time." But something in me was starting to feel uneasy. The house was quiet, in a way that old houses aren't supposed to be quiet. There was no settling. No creaking, just Claire's footsteps, and then nothing. At the 2-hour mark, she came back downstairs. Her face was pale, and she was moving differently, with purpose, but also with something that looked like barely controlled panic. "We need to evacuate this house," she said. The room went silent. Tom looked up from his phone. "What? Everyone out, now. We need to call a structural engineer immediately, and probably the city inspectors." Her voice was level, but I could hear the tension underneath. "This house is not safe." Derek laughed. "Come on, it's been standing for 40 years. It won't be standing much longer if we don't act right now." Claire set her pink toolbox down and pulled out her phone. "Mr. Carter, you said you've been in construction for 23 years. "That's right. Have you ever seen a house where the main support beam for a second-story addition was held up by decorative column wraps and hope?" I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "The beam that's supposed to be supporting the entire second-floor addition, approximately 8,000 pounds of structure, is resting on what amounts to hollow wooden shells. The actual support posts were removed at some point, probably during a cosmetic renovation, and somebody just wrapped the beam ends in decorative trim to make it look like columns. I found stress fractures in the ceiling joists, evidence of differential settlement, and moisture damage that suggests this has been failing for years." Mike's smile faded. Tom stood up. Derek's face went from skeptical to concerned in about 3 seconds. "You're sure?" Tom asked. Claire turned her phone to show us a photograph. Even from where I was standing, I could see what she meant. The image showed a close-up of where a large wooden beam met what should have been a support column, but instead of solid wood or steel, there was just nothing. A decorative wrap, like she'd said, like wrapping paper around air. "That crack we heard this morning," Claire said, "that was probably this beam shifting another fraction of an inch. If it fails completely, the entire second story could collapse. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but it's coming." Tom was already dialing someone. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, the same feeling you get when you're driving on the highway and you see brake lights ahead, that moment before you know how bad it's going to be. "How did no one catch this?" Derek asked. "Because nobody looked," Claire said simply. "When you trust that something was built right, you don't question it. The cosmetic work was good enough that it looked structural. But I measured the load paths, checked the moisture levels in the wood, and found the fracture patterns. That's what I do. With a pink toolbox and a legal pad, with tools I'd mocked an hour ago." "Everybody out," Tom said, lowering his phone. "I just talked to our insurance company. They're sending someone out this afternoon. Claire, they want you to stay on site and document everything." We filed out of the house in silence. The June morning that had seemed so ordinary 2 hours ago now felt surreal. I stood on the front lawn and looked back at the Kowalski house, this perfectly normal colonial in a perfectly normal suburb, and tried to comprehend that it had been on the verge of catastrophic failure. Mike walked past me toward his truck. "Guess you owe her an apology," he said quietly. I watched Claire through the front window, moving carefully through the house with her phone out, documenting the disaster none of us had seen. The pink toolbox sat on the floor by the stairs, absurdly bright against the dusty hardwood. That crack this morning, the one that made me freeze with my coffee cup in the air, wasn't just a sound. It was the house screaming. And the only person who'd listened was the woman with the flower-covered toolbox we'd all dismissed the moment she walked in the door. The city inspector arrived at 2 in the afternoon. His name was Raymond Walsh, and he had the kind of face that made it clear he'd seen every shortcut, every code violation, and every contractor who swore they'd done everything by the book. He spent 3 hours inside the Kowalski house with Claire, and when they came out, his expression was grim. "This is one of the most dangerous structural situations I've encountered in 15 years, he told Tom on the front lawn. "The addition needs to be demolished immediately, and we need to bring in engineers to assess whether the main house structure has been compromised. I'm issuing a red tag. Nobody enters this property without clearance." Tom nodded, his jaw tight. He pulled out his phone and started making calls to the homeowners, to the insurance company, to the bonding agency. The renovation project we'd planned for 6 months had just become a liability case. I stood by my truck, watching all of this unfold, and felt a specific kind of shame that I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just about being wrong. I'd been wrong plenty of times on job sites. Everyone had. You learn, you adjust, you move on. This was different. This was about the casual cruelty of dismissing someone based on appearances, based on assumptions, based on the kind of arrogance that made me think I knew better just because I'd been doing this longer. Claire was talking to the inspector near his vehicle, pointing at something on her phone. She'd spent the entire day documenting the structural failures, measuring load paths, photographing every stress fracture and moisture pattern. While we'd been standing around making jokes, she'd been doing the work that might have just saved lives. Derek and Mike had already left. Tom was still on the phone, pacing in the driveway. I walked over to where Claire was standing. "Miss Hewitt," I said. She looked up, her expression neutral, professional, not hostile, but not warm either. "I owe you an apology," I continued. "What I said this morning about your toolbox, that was out of line. You potentially saved lives today, and all I did was make assumptions and crack jokes." She studied me for a moment. "The toolbox comment, or the part where you assumed I didn't know what I was doing?" I felt my face heat up. "Both. Mr. Carter, I've been in this industry for 12 years. I have a master's degree in structural engineering from Purdue. I've worked on everything from high-rise construction in Chicago to bridge rehabilitation in Cincinnati. And at almost every single job site, I walk in and men look at my toolbox, the one my 8-year-old daughter decorated for me because she wanted me to have something pretty to carry to work. And they make the same calculation you did this morning, that I'm not serious, that I'm not qualified, that I'm going to waste their time." The words hit harder than I expected. "The difference," she continued, "is that I stopped caring about those assumptions years ago. I show up, I do the work, and I let the results speak for themselves. So your apology, I appreciate it. But what I'd appreciate more is if you actually meant it. If you actually changed how you see people who don't fit whatever image you have in your head of what a contractor or an engineer should look like." I nodded slowly. "You're right." "I know I'm right, Mr. Carter. The question is whether you'll remember this conversation next week when you meet someone else who doesn't match your expectations." She picked up her pink toolbox, which now looked less like a toy and more like a piece of equipment that had just done its job, and walked to her truck, a dusty grey Ford Ranger with a Purdue sticker in the back window. Tom finished his call and walked over to me. "Well, this is a disaster." "Could have been worse," I said. "If we'd started demo work this morning. If Claire hadn't been here, you mean?" Tom rubbed his eyes. "The Kowalskis are devastated. They put their life savings into buying this house. Now they're finding out it's structurally unsound, and their homeowner's insurance is going to fight about whether this falls under renovation coverage or if they need to make a claim against the previous owners. What about us? The renovation contract is void. We'll get paid for today, and Claire will get her consultation fee, but everything else is on hold until the engineers and lawyers sort this out." Tom looked at the house. "You know what the worst part is? This probably happened 20 years ago. Someone did a cosmetic renovation, removed load-bearing supports and just covered it up, made it look good. And everyone who's owned this house since then has been living in a slow-motion collapse. I thought about the Kowalskis' 3 kids, the trampoline in the backyard, family dinners in a dining room held up by decorative trim and luck. "I need to go talk to my crew," I said. "Let them know the job's off." Tom nodded. "I'll send the formal cancellation by email tonight. I'm sorry, Ben. I know you were counting on this work." I was. My crew consisted of me, 2 carpenters, and a rotating roster of day laborers depending on the project. The Kowalski renovation was supposed to carry us through to October. Now I'd have to scramble to find other work, probably smaller jobs that paid less and ran shorter. But as I drove away from Maple Ridge Drive that afternoon, watching the Kowalski house disappear in my rearview mirror, the financial worry felt secondary to something else, a deeper unease. How many other houses were out there with hidden problems? How many times had I walked onto a job site, assessed the situation based on surface appearances, and missed something crucial because I was too confident in my own experience? That night, I sat at my kitchen table in my small rental house in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus. My daughter, Emma, was at her mother's place. We had joint custody, week on, week off, so the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of traffic from High Street. I opened my laptop and looked up Claire Hewitt. Her consulting company, Hewitt Structural Solutions, had a simple website with a list of projects and qualifications. She'd worked on office buildings, residential renovations, historic preservation projects. There were testimonials from contractors and homeowners, all saying basically the same thing. She was thorough, professional, and had caught problems that others had missed. One testimonial was from a contractor in Cincinnati. Claire found a foundation issue in a Victorian home that would have cost us hundreds of thousands in liability. She saved our business. Another from a homeowner in Cleveland. We almost bought a house that looked perfect until Claire did the structural assessment. Turned out the entire back addition was held up by compromised joists. She saved us from a nightmare. I closed the laptop and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. 42 years old, divorced, with a teenage daughter who barely tolerated spending time with me, working in an industry I'd devoted half my life to, and apparently learning that I still didn't know as much as I thought I did. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Mum says I can stay at Emily's this weekend. That cool?" I typed back, "Sure. Have fun." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No further response. That was our relationship now. Logistical arrangements and brief exchanges. After the divorce 3 years ago, Emma had sided firmly with her mother, and I'd been too proud or too hurt or too stupid to fight for more time, more connection, more of anything. I thought about Claire's daughter decorating that toolbox. The deliberate act of love. The pride a child takes in making something special for a parent. Emma used to do things like that when she was younger. Hand-drawn birthday cards, paintings from art class, a Father's Day gift she'd made at summer camp, a keychain made of leather and beads that I'd immediately hung on my truck keys. I couldn't remember when that stopped. The next morning, I drove to a coffee shop on High Street and bought 2 large coffees, one black, one with cream and sugar, because I wasn't sure which Claire preferred. Then I drove to the Kowalski house, where the red tag was now posted on the front door. Claire's truck was already there. She was standing on the sidewalk with Raymond Walsh and 2 other people I didn't recognize, probably the structural engineers Tom had mentioned. I waited until their conversation ended, then walked over. "Morning," I said, holding out one of the coffees. "I wasn't sure how you'd take it, so I got cream and sugar on the side." She looked surprised. "That's, thoughtful. Black is fine." I handed her the cup and pocketed the cream and sugar packets. "I wanted to follow up on yesterday. You were right about everything you said, and I've been thinking about it." "Thinking about what, specifically?" "About how many times I've probably made the same mistake, not just with you, with other people, other situations. Being so sure I knew what I was looking at that I stopped actually looking." Claire took a sip of coffee. The morning was cooler than yesterday, with clouds moving in from the west. "That's surprisingly self-aware for a guy who mocked my toolbox 12 hours ago. I'm trying to do better." "Why?" The question wasn't hostile, just direct. "Is this about guilt, or is it because you actually want to change?" I thought about Emma, about the keychain that was still on my truck keys, even though she'd made it 7 years ago, about my failed marriage and my struggling business, and the feeling that I'd been coasting through life on assumptions and arrogance for too long. "Both, probably," I said honestly, "but more the second one." Claire nodded slowly. "I can work with that." Raymond Walsh called her name, and she excused herself, walking back to the group by the engineer's truck. I stood on the sidewalk drinking my coffee, watching the house that almost fell down, and wondering what other things in my life were being held up by decorative trim and luck. 3 weeks passed. The Kowalski house became a case study in structural failure. Engineers from Ohio State University asked permission to document it for teaching purposes. The local news ran a story about hidden dangers in older homes. The previous owners were facing a lawsuit, and Claire Hewitt's phone, I imagined, was ringing off the hook. My phone was quieter. Tom had found other work for his crew, but my part had been specific to the Kowalski renovation. I picked up 2 smaller jobs, a deck repair in German Village and a bathroom remodel in Clintonville, but nothing that would carry me through the fall. Emma came for her week with me, and we maintained our careful distance. She spent most of her time in her room, on her phone, emerging only for meals that we ate in near silence. On Wednesday night, I knocked on her door. "Yeah," she called. "Can I come in?" A pause. "Sure." I opened the door to find her sitting on her bed, laptop open, headphones around her neck. Her room was neat, too neat, like she was staying in a hotel rather than living in part of her own home. "I wanted to ask you something," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "When you were 8, you decorated a toolbox for me. Do you remember that?" She looked up, surprised. "That was for Mom, not you." I felt something sink in my chest. "What?" "The pink toolbox with the flowers. That was for Mom's birthday. She wanted a toolbox for doing stuff around the house, so I decorated one for her." Emma tilted her head. "Why are you asking?" There was a woman at a job site who had a toolbox like that. She said her daughter made it for her. I assumed—" I stopped. "I thought you'd made one for me and I'd forgotten about it." "Dad, you're a carpenter. Why would I make you a toolbox? You have like 6. She was right. I did have 6 toolboxes, plus rolling tool chests, plus organizational systems that I'd spent years perfecting. And somehow, in my mind, I'd rewritten history to make myself the recipient of a thoughtful gift that had never existed. "You're right," I said. I got confused. Emma looked at me with an expression that was equal parts concern and teenage disdain. Are you okay? Yeah, just tired. I straightened up. Want to watch a movie or something? I have homework. Right, okay, let me know if you need anything. I closed her door and stood in the hallway, feeling untethered. Even my memories were unreliable now. I'd built an entire narrative around a toolbox that wasn't mine, about a relationship with my daughter that existed more in my imagination than in reality. The financial reality of losing the Kowalski job hit harder than I wanted to admit. On Thursday afternoon, I sat in my home office, a converted bedroom, with a desk I'd built myself and filing cabinets filled with invoices, permits and project plans, and ran the numbers. The deck repair would pay for 2 weeks of expenses. The bathroom remodel might stretch to a month if I was careful. After that, I'd be dipping into savings that were already thinner than they should be. My phone buzzed. A text from Mike. Heard Tom got hit with a lawsuit from the Kowalskis. They're going after everyone. Previous owners, inspection company, the whole chain. Glad we dodged that bullet. I stared at the message. We hadn't dodged anything. Claire had caught the bullet before it hit us. There was a difference. I called my 2 full-time carpenters, Jake and Marcus, and told them I didn't have work for them next week. Jake, who had 3 kids and a mortgage, took it better than Marcus, who was younger and still thought construction jobs grew on trees. How long are we looking at? Jake asked. I don't know. I'm working on it. Ben, I can't go more than a month without steady work. I'll have to start looking for other crews. I understand. Do what you need to do. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my empty house and felt the weight of responsibility. These weren't just employees. They were people who counted on me for their livelihoods. Jake's oldest daughter was starting college next year. Marcus was trying to save up to propose to his girlfriend, and I was the one who'd put together a crew and promised them steady work, only to come up short. That evening, Emma came home from soccer practice. She dropped her bag by the door and headed straight for the kitchen. I followed her. How was practice? Fine. She opened the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of water. Coach still starting you at midfield? Yeah. She took a long drink, then looked at me. Why are you being weird? I'm not being weird. I'm asking about your day. You never ask about my day. I'm trying to change that. Emma closed the refrigerator and leaned against the counter, studying me. Did something happen? I thought about lying, giving her the parent-approved version where everything was fine and adults had everything under control. But I was tired of that version, tired of pretending. I lost a big job, I said. The renovation I was counting on to carry us through the fall. It's going to be tight for a while. Her expression shifted. Not to worry, but to something more complicated. Are we okay? We're okay. I'm not saying we have to sell the house or anything. Just, it's a reminder that construction work can be unpredictable. Emma nodded slowly. Mom always said you were bad at saving money. The comment stung, but it wasn't wrong. Your mom was right about a lot of things. She said you spent everything you made on tools and truck upgrades. Also true. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. I thought if I had the best equipment, the work would keep coming. Turns out that's not how it works. Emma sat down across from me. What are you going to do? Find more work. That's what you do in this business. You hustle, you network. You take jobs you might not love because they pay the bills. She twisted the cap on her water bottle. That sounds stressful. It is, but it's also the life I chose. I looked at her. When you think about what you want to do after high school, think about stability. Think about what kind of life you want to build. Dad, I'm 16. I don't know what I want for dinner tomorrow, let alone the rest of my life. Fair enough? I stood up. I'm going to make spaghetti. You want to help? She looked surprised. You're cooking? I can cook. I've been cooking for myself for 3 years. You usually just order pizza or make sandwiches. Well, tonight we're having spaghetti. Come on, you can cut the garlic. We cooked together in a silence that was almost comfortable. Emma was methodical with the knife, cutting the garlic into precise, uniform pieces. I showed her how to tell when the pasta was done by testing it, not just trusting the timer. We didn't talk much, but there was something about the shared task that felt like progress. Over dinner, she asked me about the Kowalski house. I told her the story, about Claire and the pink toolbox, about the structural failure, about my assumptions and how wrong I'd been. So you were basically sexist, Emma said, twirling spaghetti on her fork. Yeah, I was. At least you're admitting it. Admitting it is the easy part. Actually changing is harder. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. Mom has a toolbox. Did you know that? Your mom? Yeah, she keeps it in the garage. It's blue with white flowers. I decorated it for her birthday when I was 8. The memory I'd falsely claimed suddenly had context. The toolbox existed, but it had never been mine. It belonged to Sarah, my ex-wife, and I'd been so disconnected from my own family that I hadn't even known it existed. I didn't know that, I said quietly. She uses it all the time. She fixed the back door last month when the hinge broke, and she installed new shelves in the bathroom. I felt a strange mix of pride and regret. Sarah had always been capable, but during our marriage, I'd been the one who insisted on doing all the repairs, the one who had to be the expert on everything related to the house. Maybe if I'd stepped back, asked for help, let her participate, things might have been different. That's great, I said. I'm glad she's doing that stuff. Emma looked at me carefully. Are you really, or are you just saying that? I'm really glad. Your mom deserves to feel capable and independent. She is capable. She always was. You just never noticed. The words landed hard, but they were true. I'd spent so long being the expert, the one with all the answers, that I'd stopped seeing the competence of the people around me. Claire with her structural engineering degree, Sarah with her practical intelligence, even Emma, sitting across from me, cutting garlic with precision and challenging me with uncomfortable truths. You're right, I said. I have a habit of not noticing things. Yeah, Emma agreed. You really do. That Saturday, I was working on the deck repair in German Village when my phone rang. Claire Hewitt. Mr. Carter? Ben, please. Ben, I have something I'd like to discuss with you. Are you available to meet this afternoon? We met at a diner on Parsons Avenue, the kind of place that served breakfast all day and had vinyl booths patched with duct tape. Claire was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner booth with a folder in front of her. Thanks for meeting me, she said, as I slid into the seat across from her. Of course. What's this about? She opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. After the Kowalski situation, I've been contacted by 3 other homeowners in Columbus who want structural assessments. One in Worthington, one in Upper Arlington, one in Bexley. All houses built in the 80s and 90s, with additions or renovations done in the early 2000s. I think we might have a pattern of substandard work from a specific contractor or crew that operated in that time frame. You want me to help with the assessments? Not exactly. She pulled out another document. I want you to learn how to do what I do. I need someone who understands the practical side of construction, how buildings actually go together, what shortcuts contractors take, what failures look like in real time. I have the engineering background, but I don't have your hands-on experience. Together, we could probably catch things that neither of us would see alone. I stared at her. You want to partner with me? After what happened? I want to partner with you because of what happened. You apologized, you showed up with coffee, and you asked genuine questions about how to do better. That's more accountability than I've gotten from 90% of the people in this industry. She leaned back. Look, I don't need a business partner. I can keep doing this work solo. But I think we could do better work together. I also think you need the work, based on how your crew schedule is looking. How do you know about my schedule? Tom mentioned it when I talked to him last week about another project. I looked at the photographs, houses that looked perfectly normal from the outside. What would this partnership look like? I train you on structural assessment methods. You bring your practical knowledge and your reputation in the local contractor community. We split fees 50-50 on joint projects. I keep my existing client base, you keep yours, but we collaborate on cases that need both skill sets. Why me? Claire smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Because you're one of the few people who's actually admitted they were wrong, and in this industry, that's rarer than you'd think. I thought about my empty schedule, about Emma's tidy room that felt like a guest space, about the toolbox I'd misremembered, and the years I'd spent confident in my own expertise while missing everything that mattered. Okay, I said, I'm in. We spent the next 2 hours going over case files. Claire explained her methodology, how she mapped load paths, identified stress patterns, used moisture meters to find hidden water damage, how she documented everything with photographs and detailed notes. She showed me examples of structural failures, compromised joists, inadequate foundations, load-bearing walls that had been removed without proper support. The thing most people don't understand, she said, pushing her empty coffee cup aside, is that buildings are living systems. They're constantly responding to loads, to weather, to time. When something fails, it's usually not sudden. It's a gradual process. Cracks appear, settlement happens, moisture intrudes, and if you know how to read those signs, you can predict failures before they become catastrophic. Like the Kowalski house. Exactly. That crack we heard on day one. That was the system screaming, but it had probably been whispering for years. I thought about my own life, the cracks in my marriage that I'd ignored until they became a chasm, the distance with Emma that had grown so gradually I didn't notice until she was already gone, the way I'd stopped questioning my own assumptions until Claire walked in with a pink toolbox and showed me everything I'd missed. When do we start? I asked. Monday. First assessment is in Worthington. Couple in their 60s, bought the house 15 years ago. They're hearing noises in the walls and seeing cracks in the ceiling. Their contractor told them it's just normal settling. But you don't think so? I think normal settling doesn't make noises that wake you up at 2 in the morning. We shook hands across the table, and I felt something shift. Not hope exactly, more like the possibility of becoming someone who paid attention, who looked deeper, who didn't rely on surface judgments and outdated assumptions. That night, I picked Emma up from her friend's house. She was quiet in the car, scrolling through her phone. As we pulled into the driveway, I turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. "Em," I said. "Yeah, I've been a pretty lousy dad the past few years." She looked up from her phone, surprised. "What?" "After the divorce, I let things slide. I didn't fight for more time with you. I didn't ask about your life. I just coasted. And I'm sorry." Emma stared at me. "Why are you saying this?" "Because it's true. And because I want to do better. I know I can't fix everything overnight, but I want to try. If you're willing to give me the chance." She was quiet for a long moment. "Mom said you'd eventually have some kind of midlife crisis. This isn't a crisis. It's more like waking up." Emma bit her lip, a gesture she'd had since she was little when she was trying not to cry. "You really hurt me, Dad. When you and Mom split, you just disappeared. You were there physically, but you weren't actually there. I know. I needed you, and you were just checked out." The words hit like a hammer. You're right, I was. And I don't have a good excuse. But I'm here now. Really here. Emma wiped her eyes. I don't know if I can just forgive you because you suddenly decided to show up. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking for the chance to prove I mean it. She nodded slowly. Okay, we can try. We got out of the car and walked into the house together. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't even close to healed. But it was a start. A small crack in the foundation that might, if I paid attention, if I did the work, be repaired before it became something worse. The house in Worthington was a ranch style built in 1992 with an addition from 2005. The homeowners, Patricia and Donald Reeves, met us at the door on Monday morning. Patricia was a retired teacher, Donald a former engineer for a manufacturing company. They were the kind of couple who finished each other's sentences and held hands while walking through their own home. It started about 6 months ago, Patricia explained as we stood in their living room. Just small sounds at first, like creaking. But then it got louder, and the cracks... She pointed to a diagonal crack running across the ceiling. That wasn't there a year ago. Claire and I spent 3 hours going through the house. She taught me how to map the load paths, tracing how weight traveled from the roof, through the walls, down to the foundation. I showed her the practical signs of poor construction, uneven floors, doors that didn't close properly, gaps in the trimwork that suggested settlement. In the crawl space beneath the addition, we found the problem. Jesus, I muttered, shining my flashlight on the support posts. The posts holding up the addition were sitting on concrete blocks placed directly on the dirt. No footings, no proper foundation. Just concrete blocks that had been slowly sinking into the soil for 20 years, allowing the entire structure above to settle unevenly. This is going to be expensive to fix, Claire said, taking photographs. They'll need to jack up the addition, pour proper footings, install permanent supports, but fixable. Fixable, yes. Unlike the Kowalski house, this isn't imminently dangerous, but if they'd waited another 5 years... She shook her head. We delivered the news to Patricia and Donald at their kitchen table, spreading out photographs and diagrams. Donald, with his engineering background, understood immediately. Patricia looked devastated. We paid $60,000 for that addition, she said quietly. The contractor assured us everything was done to code. Did you get permits? Claire asked gently. He said he'd handle all of that. We trusted him. It was a familiar story, a contractor cutting corners, skipping permits, doing just enough to make it look right while ignoring structural fundamentals. The Reeves had been lucky. If they'd waited to sell the house, this would have come up in a buyer's inspection and killed the sale. If they'd ignored it for another decade, the addition might have pulled away from the main house entirely. I can refer you to contractors who specialize in foundation work, Claire said, and I'll document everything in a formal report that you can use for insurance claims or legal action against the original contractor. After we left, sitting in my truck outside the Reeves house, I turned to Claire. Does it ever get easier, delivering bad news? No, but what helps is knowing you're preventing worse news. If we hadn't found this, in 5 years, they might be looking at a collapsed addition and a $500,000 rebuild. Over the next 2 months, we assessed 11 more houses. 5 had significant problems, 3 were fine, just normal aging and paranoid homeowners. 3 were in a grey area, issues that needed monitoring but weren't immediately critical. Each assessment taught me something new. In a Tudor-style home in Grandview Heights, we found that a previous owner had removed a load-bearing wall and replaced it with a steel beam. But the beam was 2 sizes too small for the load it was carrying. The house had been compensating for 15 years, gradually redistributing weight through other structural members, creating stress fractures throughout the second floor. It's like the building is a living organism, Claire explained, as we examined the network of cracks radiating from where the inadequate beam connected to the wall. When one part fails, the rest tries to adapt, but eventually the adaptation fails too. In Upper Arlington, we found a brick colonial where the foundation had been slowly undermined by improper drainage. Water had been pooling against the foundation for decades, creating cavities in the soil beneath. The house was literally sitting on air pockets. "How do they not feel this?" I asked, standing in the basement, watching my level show a 2-degree slope in the floor. "They do," Claire said, "but the human mind is incredibly good at normalizing gradual change. The doors stick a little more each year, the floors feel slightly uneven, but it happens so slowly that your brain adjusts. You stop noticing until someone from outside points it out." I thought about my marriage, how Sarah and I had drifted apart so gradually that I didn't notice until she was already gone. How Emma had withdrawn from me degree by degree until one day I looked up and realized my daughter was a stranger. "That's depressing," I said. "It's human nature, but that's also why this work matters. We're the outside observers who can see what people have learned to ignore." The third case was different. A young couple in Clintonville had bought a house at auction, a foreclosure special that looked rough but structurally sound. They'd hired us before doing any work, wanting to know what they were dealing with. Smart decision. What we found was worse than anything I'd seen yet. The house had been used as a marijuana grow operation. The previous owners had heavily modified the electrical system, punched holes through load-bearing walls for ventilation, and created so much moisture damage that the entire second floor was essentially composted. Mold covered the interior of the walls. Joists were rotted through. The roof structure was compromised. "This isn't a renovation," Claire said, standing in what used to be a bedroom, her voice muffled by the respirator we both wore. "This is a teardown. The structure is so compromised that trying to save it would cost more than rebuilding from scratch." The couple, Tyler and Jessica, both in their late 20s, looked devastated when we delivered the news in their car outside the house. They'd pooled all their resources to buy this place, their first home. "We can't afford to rebuild," Jessica said, her voice breaking. "We spent everything on the purchase." I glanced at Claire, then back at Tyler and Jessica. "You bought this at auction?" "Yeah. Sight unseen, mostly. We looked at photos and thought we could fix it up." "Did you use a buyer's agent? Get an inspection?" Tyler shook his head. "We couldn't afford one. We thought we were being smart, getting a deal." Claire and I exchanged a look. This was the dark side of the housing market, people with limited resources making uninformed decisions that would haunt them for years. "I'll write my report for free," Claire said. "You can use it to pursue legal action against the auction company for failure to disclose material defects. No guarantees, but it's a starting point. I'll connect you with a real estate attorney I know," I added. "He does some pro bono work. Maybe he can help." After they drove away, Claire and I stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of the condemned house. The afternoon was cool, with leaves falling from the oak trees that lined the street. "You didn't have to offer free work," I said. "Neither did you have to offer legal connections. They're kids who made a mistake. The system's designed to punish people like that." Claire nodded. "That's why I do this work. Not for the money, though the money's nice, but because someone needs to be looking out for the people who don't know what to look for." I learned to see buildings the way Claire did, not as static objects, but as dynamic systems under constant stress. I learned to read moisture patterns, stress fractures, settlement indicators. I learned that the most dangerous problems were often the ones hidden beneath cosmetic improvements. The fresh paint over a compromised wall, the new flooring covering a sagging subfloor. But more than that, I learned to question my assumptions. When I walked onto a job site now, I didn't just rely on my experience. I asked questions. I looked deeper. I stayed humble in the face of what I didn't know. I started noticing patterns in my own behavior too. How often I interrupted people, how quickly I formed judgments, how my first instinct was always to assume I knew the answer before I'd fully understood the question. One afternoon in late August, I was having lunch with Jake and Marcus. I'd found enough small jobs to bring them back on for a few weeks when Marcus asked me about Claire. "Is it true you guys are partners now?" he asked, biting into a sandwich. "Consulting partners, yeah. We work together on structural assessments." Jake raised an eyebrow. "The woman with the pink toolbox?" "That's her. Mike said she's got a master's degree from Purdue," Marcus said. "Said she's legit." "She is. She's better at this work than anyone I've ever met." Jake studied me. "You're different lately, Ben. More. I don't know. Present." "Present?" "Yeah, like you're actually here instead of just going through the motions. It's been good to see." The comment caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on my own internal changes that I hadn't realized they were visible to others. "I'm trying," I said simply. "It shows," Jake said. "Keep it up." My relationship with Emma improved slowly. I started asking about her day and actually listening to the answers. I showed up to her soccer games, not just physically present but engaged, cheering, talking to her afterward about specific plays. I asked about her friends, her classes, her worries about college applications. One Tuesday night in September, she came home from school upset. I could tell by the way she dropped her backpack, not just setting it down, but dropping it with force. "What happened?" I asked from the kitchen. "Nothing. Em." She appeared in the doorway, her face flushed. "I got a C on my calculus test. Mom's going to kill me." "Okay. First, your mom's not going to kill you. Second, what happened? You're usually good at math." "I don't know. I couldn't focus. There's so much stuff happening. College applications are due soon, and I don't even know what I want to study. And coach is putting all this pressure on us to perform, and I'm just tired all the time." I gestured to the kitchen table. "Sit. Let's talk about it." She hesitated, then sat down. I pulled out a chair across from her. "The calculus test, is it a pattern or a one-time thing?" "One time, I think. I usually understand the material, but this unit on derivatives just isn't clicking." "Do you have a tutor? Study group?" "No, I've been trying to figure it out on my own." "Why?" She shrugged. "Because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Be independent. Figure things out yourself." I recognized the mindset immediately. It was mine. The same stubborn self-reliance that had kept me from asking for help in my marriage, in my business, in my life. There's a difference between independence and isolation. Asking for help doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. But you never ask for help. The observation hit like a punch. You're right. I don't. And that's been one of my biggest problems. I'm trying to change that. Emma looked at me. Really looked at me. "You mean with that Claire woman, the structural consultant?" "Yeah. She's teaching me things I never learned in 23 years of construction, and I'm teaching her things from my experience. We're better together than either of us would be alone." "Huh." She processed that. "So you're saying I should get a tutor?" "I'm saying you should get whatever help you need. Tutor, study group, office hours with your teacher. Whatever works." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll ask around about study groups tomorrow. And the college thing, you don't have to have it all figured out. You're 16. It's okay to not know. Mom keeps asking me what my plan is. Your mom wants the best for you, but she also needs to hear that you're still figuring it out, and that's okay." Emma stood up, grabbed her backpack. At the doorway, she paused. "Thanks, Dad. Anytime." One Saturday in September, she was at the kitchen table working on homework when I came in from a job site. She looked up. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you and Mom split up?" I set down my tool bag and sat across from her. It was a question I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. A lot of reasons. We grew apart. We wanted different things. We stopped communicating. But you loved each other once, right? Yes, very much. Emma traced a pattern on the table with her finger. Was it my fault? God, no. I reached across and put my hand over hers. Nothing about the divorce was your fault. Nothing. Your mum and I made mistakes, but none of them had anything to do with you. Then why did you disappear after? I took a breath. Because I was ashamed that I'd failed at my marriage, ashamed that I'd hurt you. And instead of dealing with those feelings, I just shut down. I went through the motions, I showed up, but I wasn't present. And that was wrong, that was all on me. Emma's eyes were wet. I missed you, the real you. I missed me too. She laughed, a watery sound. That's such a dad thing to say. We talked for an hour that afternoon, not fixing everything. You can't repair years of damage in one conversation, but building something new. A foundation that was properly supported this time, built on honesty instead of assumptions, on presence instead of coasting. In October, Claire and I got a call from a contractor in Cincinnati who'd heard about our work. He had a commercial project, a historic building renovation, and wanted a comprehensive structural assessment before starting demo. It was the biggest job either of us had taken on, with a fee that would carry both our businesses through the winter. We drove down on a Tuesday morning, the leaves turning gold and red along I-71. Claire brought coffee. She knew now that I took it black, and we talked through our assessment plan on the drive. You know, she said as we passed through Wilmington, when I first met you, I thought you were just another arrogant contractor who wouldn't listen. I was, I said, but you changed, actually changed. That's rare. I had good motivation and a good teacher. She smiled. The pink toolbox probably helped. The pink toolbox definitely helped. The Cincinnati job took 3 days. We found problems, water damage in the masonry, compromised floor joists in the basement, a roof structure that needed reinforcement, but nothing catastrophic. The contractor was grateful, professional, and made it clear he'd call us for future projects. On the drive back to Columbus, as the sun set behind us and the highway stretched out ahead, I thought about the past 5 months. About Claire walking into the Kowalski house with her bright pink toolbox and finding the disaster none of us had seen. About learning to question my assumptions. About rebuilding my relationship with Emma. About becoming someone who actually paid attention. What are you thinking about? Claire asked. That crack we heard on the first day at the Kowalski house, I said. How it was the structure screaming, but we almost ignored it. We didn't ignore it. I didn't ignore it. Right, but I would have. If you hadn't been there, I would have started demo work that morning. We all would have, because we thought we knew what we were looking at. Claire nodded. That's the thing about experience. It's valuable, but it can also make you blind. You see what you expect to see instead of what's actually there. I thought about Emma's room, no longer painfully neat but lived in, with sports equipment in the corner and homework scattered on the desk. I thought about my schedule, full now with projects that actually mattered. I thought about the structures I'd learned to see, not just as buildings, but as systems that required attention, maintenance, honest assessment. Thank you, I said. For what? For showing up with that ridiculous toolbox and proving me wrong. Claire laughed. It's not ridiculous. My daughter made it. I know, that's what makes it perfect. We drove in silence for a few miles. Then Claire spoke again. Can I tell you something? Of course. When I walked into the Kowalski house that first morning, I almost turned around and left. I glanced at her, surprised. Why? Because I heard you and the other guys laughing about my toolbox, and I thought, here we go again, another job site where I have to prove myself before anyone will listen to me. I was tired, Ben. So tired of always having to be twice as good to be taken half as seriously. But you didn't leave. No, because I thought about my daughter, Sophie. She's 8, and she thinks I'm the smartest person in the world. She made me that toolbox because she was proud of what I do, and I thought, if I let a bunch of dismissive contractors run me off, what does that teach her? That other people's opinions matter more than your own competence. I felt a wave of shame. I'm sorry for all of it. I know you are. And the fact that you actually changed, that you didn't just apologize and go back to the same old patterns, that means something. Most people don't do that. Most people are better than I was. You'd be surprised. She looked out the window. The construction industry has gotten better in some ways. More women, more diversity, but it's still hard. Every job site, I have to prove myself. Every client meeting, someone assumes I'm the secretary instead of the engineer. It gets exhausting. How do you keep doing it? Because I love the work. I love figuring out why buildings stand or fall. I love that moment when you find the hidden problem, the thing everyone else missed. It's like solving a puzzle where the stakes are people's lives. She smiled. And because of Sophie, I want her to grow up seeing that women can do this work, can be good at it, can demand respect for their expertise. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She keeps me honest. Claire paused. What about Emma? How's that going? Better, slowly better. We're actually talking now, real conversations, not just logistics. The narrator reflects on how much his life has changed over the past few months as he returns home after dropping off Claire, a colleague and growing friend with whom he celebrates professional progress. At home, he spends a quiet evening with his daughter Emma, who shares her academic success and brings up a sensitive topic: the possibility of spending Thanksgiving together with both parents and her mother's new partner. Though uncomfortable, he agrees, putting Emma's emotional well-being first. The following week, he meets Claire for drinks to celebrate a new job. Their conversation deepens their bond as they talk about family, past mistakes, and future goals. Claire shares her desire to teach, while he reflects on rebuilding trust with Emma, running an ethical business, and continuing to learn after years of overconfidence. By the end, the narrator realizes he is rebuilding both his professional life and his relationship with his daughter. Messages from Claire and Emma reinforce this sense of progress, and he feels that, after a long period of instability, he's finally laying a solid foundation for the future.